Hello and welcome to the last module of English Linguistics 315 before we break for fall break. We are getting into the last subsection, which is morphology. And so you have new readings for this. This is chapter 4 of your textbook, pages 98 to 120. So let's remind ourselves what we have been doing this entire semester and where we are in this class. So we have been interested in understanding what goes inside our brain when we speak a language, and the answer from previous sections have been we have some kind of mental representation of language, and this involved the International Phonetic Alphabet. And then when we looked at phonology, we saw that there are certain kinds of phonological rules like the syllabification rule and the aspiration rule that we make use of when we speak a language. When you have an understanding of how you actually put together different syllables and create words out of them, we can talk about the rules behind these sort of word formation processes. And so that's morphology, the rules for forming words, and each of us have what we call a mental lexicon inside our brain. The mental lexicon is kind of like a dictionary, a personal dictionary, if you will, and it also has all the information about all the words that you know. And it also has the phonetic or phonemic representation of the word. It has the word's meaning and also the part of speech. So here is a example of a mental lexicon. I've given you 3 different words over here. So I have the noun dog, I have the adjective happy, and I have the verb love. And as you can see, the mental lexicon separates all these 3 into the different parts of speech with respect to each of these speech sounds or words, and also has a meaning associated with each of them. So when we talk about the mental lexicon, we obviously know that you have a very limited memory when it comes to how many words you can actually keep inside your brain. So let me illustrate this with a new word that I'm making up, and I'm going to tell you that blorking is a new word that I'm making up, means to ask really long-winded questions at linguistics talks, and I know quite a lot of people who actually do this at linguistic conferences. Now suppose I said to you that Maithili is a notorious blorker. Do you understand the meaning of this, irrespective of whether I actually told you what a blorker is? You probably could. And even though I hadn't told you blorker, you understood the meaning of this. Even though it wasn't a part of your mental lexicon, even though this word was not part of the mental lexicon, you understood the meaning, and so that meaning that you assign to this new word that you've never heard before called blorker comes from somewhere, right? It comes from a rule that we can create with respect to morphology. So the rule is that if you take a verb of English, any verb of English, and you add er to it, the meaning of the word that is derived from adding er to any verb of English means one who does that particular verb. So blorker is one who blorks. So the conclusion is that the word formation rules in English are rather regular, and they form part of the morphology of the particular language that we're looking at. So here is some vocabulary to get you started with morphology. We will use the term morpheme, and as you can see, it's very easy for students to get confused between phonemes and morphemes. Phonemes is a fundamental unit of sound, and we use that in phonology, and morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning, or a sequence of phonemes to which meaning is assigned, and we use that in morphology. So I've given you a couple of examples of morphemes. We can very often divide morphemes into 2. We can talk about free morphemes and we can talk about one morpheme. So a free morpheme is a morpheme that can stand itself alone as a complete word. So examples of free morphemes are blork, Maithili loves to blork, and play, my cat loves to play. And with bond morphemes, these morphemes are always attaching to a free morpheme. So an example of this is the ER, where you can say Maithili is a real blorker, but you can't really say Maithili is a real ER. So we call both we call these kind of bound morphemes as affixes in English, and we can kind of divide them into two for English. We can have prefixes and suffixes. Prefixes come at the beginning of the word and suffixes come at the end of the word. And English also has a limited number of infixes, but there are other languages that have a lot more infixes than English. We won't worry about them in 315. But here's an example of a suffix, which is er. Maithili is a real blocker or a player. So let us start by understanding the meaning of the English suffix er. The first observation that we can make with respect to er is that the er suffix only attaches to verbs. So you can have things like porker, player, baker, dancer, etc. And it cannot attach to any other kind of word, right? So you cannot say piano and pianoer, meaning one who plays the piano, or book and booker, meaning one who reads the book. And it also cannot attach to adjectives like beautiful and beautifuler, right? So the first generalization that we can draw is that the suffix er can only attach to verbs. Now at this point you might be thinking about cases where you actually can have er attaching to adjectives like pretty and prettier, but that's actually another er. English has a lot of these kind of reduplicative suffixes, and so we won't worry about that er, not as yet. We will come back to it towards the end of this lecture. The second observation with respect to er is that when er attaches to a verb, the resulting word is a noun. So when you have blork, and there's a typo over there, it's blork and not block. So blork and blorker, you can see that to blork and to play are verbs, but blorker and player are nouns. How do we know that these are nouns? Because you can actually have a definite article like the attached in front of it. So the second part of our generalization is that when you have er attaching to the verb, you can actually create nouns with it. So a noun in English can be created by attaching er to the end of a verb. Now we can use the same kind of formal notation that we use for phonological rules, and we can actually create a rule of English, and you can say that you can create a noun by attaching a verb, by taking a verb and attaching er to it. So n, we, they stand for parts of speech. So n is a noun, we is a verb, a is an adjective, etc. And then the arrow represents can be created from, and the plus sign is a combined with. And then you can also create a kind of morphological structure for this. So this is the morphological structure of player. So you have play, which is a verb, and then er, which is a suffix, and you can attach these two together and you can get the noun. Now you can look at different suffixes in English. So we will run through a couple of different suffixes of English, and we will see what kind of words they can attach with and what are the words that can be derived by attaching the suffix to another morpheme. So I want you to look at the words on the left hand side, and I want you to look at the words on the right hand side. Let's start with the words on the left hand side first. What is the part of speech of happy, sad, blue, and round? You guessed that correctly. The part of speech of the words on the left hand side are adjectives. And happiness, sadness, blueness, and roundness, what's a part of speech of these words? They are not adjectives, they are nouns. So you can now write a rule just like how we did before. You can say that you can create a noun by taking an adjective and adding the suffix ness to it. So in some sense, you know that ness cannot attach to any other words other than adjectives. So this is kind of giving you an indication of the meaning of this particular suffix. So how do we actually confirm that this is actually true? We confirm this by creating a new word in English. So I'm going to tell you that grug means lame, and you could probably understand this. The grugness of this talk is undeniable, right? Even though I had never told you what grugness is, you only know that the verb or the adjective grug means lame. And so the way that you're understanding grugness is because you are using the rule that we just described before, that you can take any adjective, even though it's a new novel adjective, attach the suffix to it, and you can derive a noun from that. All right. The second confirmation is you take another part of speech and you attach ness to it, and suddenly all that you get is ungrammatical sentences. You get ungrammatical words. So you can have verbs like walkness, steelness, scrapeness, where you're taking a verb and you're attaching ness to it, but it's ungrammatical because ness is actually looking for an adjective. And the same thing with nouns. You can't take a noun like chair, tree, and hat and attach ness to it and get something like happiness or sadness. Now we go on to able. So I want you to again look at the words on the left hand side and tell me what the part of speech is of those words. So the part of speech of the words on the left hand side is verb, right? To write, to do, to see, to like, etc. And what is the part of speech of the words on the right hand side? Writable, doable, seeable, likable. That's right, these are adjectives. So now you can create in the same fashion a rule for the suffix able. You take a verb of English, you attach able to it, and what you get is an adjective. You can confirm this again by creating a new word like krub, which means to analyze, and you can understand the meaning of this language's phonology is totally krubable, right? Which means analyzable, for example. And also the second confirmation, where you take different parts of speech and attach able to it and get ungrammatical words such as happyable, sadable, glueable, chairable, treeable, and hatable. Moving on to the suffix ing, again, tell me the part of speech of the words on the left-hand side. Bore, tire, excite, and annoy. These are verbs. And what about the words on the right-hand side? Boring, tiring, exciting, annoying. These are also verbs, right? Sorry, these are adjectives, right? Boring, tiring, exciting, and annoying. And so you can create a new rule where you take the verb and attach the suffix ing, and then you derive the adjective. And again, to confirm this, I can create a new word called drass, which means to make angry, and you can probably understand the meaning of that comment on my paper was really drassing. And the second confirmation, you can attach ing, so to adjectives like happying, sadding, blueing, and nouns like chairing, treeing, hatting, and see that these are actually ungrammatical. Now we come to the other suffix er that I said we will come back to towards the end of the lecture. This is the different suffix from things like player and blorker, dancer, walker, etc. And so if you look at the words on the left-hand side, you know that these are actually adjectives, and the words on the right-hand side are also adjectives. So you can create a new rule saying that you take an adjective and you attach er to it, and you can derive another adjective. And now, again, just to remind you that we already have another suffix er, which takes a verb and gives you a noun. So play, player, dance, dancer, etc. Right? And so what these two morphemes are, they are called as homophonous morphemes. That is, they look exactly the same and they sound exactly the same, but they have two different meanings. So here I've given you some examples of words that are homophonous with each other. So the color red and the verb for the past tense for the verb red are homophonous. Blue and blue, shed and shed, bank and bank. And these have two different meanings depending on what part of speech you assign to this homophonous morpheme. So you have two different ERs, one that combines with the verb and derives nouns, and one that combines with adjectives and derives the comparative form of the adjective. Now we've seen a whole lot of suffixes, and now we will move on to prefixes. So with prefixes, remember I told you that the prefixes appear at the beginning of the morpheme, beginning of the word. So here are some words on the left-hand side, and these are verbs. And what about the words on the right-hand side? Redo, retype, rezip, reprint. These are also verbs. So you can create the rule that you take a prefix re and attach it to a verb, what you get is a verb, right? And as you can see, the only difference between the rule for the suffixes and the prefix is where you write the suffix or the prefix. The prefix comes first on the right-hand side and the suffix comes last on the right-hand side. That's really the only difference between the two. And now you can confirm this again with our made-up word group, and we can say we need to regroup this language's phonology, and you understand the meaning of this because you're using the rule that we just formed before to understand the meaning of this. And we can also put it in front of adjectives and nouns and not get actual words of English. Here's the prefix un. As you can see, un takes adjectives, which is on the left-hand side, and gives you adjectives. So you can say, you can take un and attach it to an adjective, and what you get is an adjective. And just like er, un also has another homophonous morpheme, where, as you can see, it takes verbs and gives you verbs. So these are two different homophonous uns. Prefixes in English. So you take un, you attach it to a verb, and you get a verb. All right, so here is a summary of all the morphological rules that we have seen. We have rules that take verbs and derive nouns. We have rules that take verbs and derive adjectives. We have prefixes, etc. Now you might be wondering, oh my God, these are so many rules, right? And you can obviously create more rules because we obviously have more suffixes and more prefixes in English. But in the next lecture for this week, I will show you that we only need one rule to actually understand what is actually going on. And we will talk about that when we talk about compounding, for example. Now, the fact of these rules is that you can actually take different rules and you can reiterate them and create complex structure. So here are two examples. So this is the word doable and then the word undoable, right? So you can see that you start with the root form of the word, which is do, right? And then you attach able to it. And so you get doable, right? And so do is a verb, able is looking for a verb, you put doable together, and then you take the input doable and then you attach the prefix onto it to get undoable, right? So the idea is that words don't actually start out as undoable. There's a lot more complex morphological structure to words, and you can break them down into smaller morphemes. Here's another one for dress. You can take undress, which is a prefix, and then you can put another prefix in front of it to get re-undress. And obviously you can create more complicated words like anti-disestablishmentarianism. Now, a fact about these rules that can actually reiterate is that in many cases you actually get ambiguity with respect to the meaning, because you can create rules in multiple different ways. You can derive things in two different ways. So here's an illustration with unlockable, and I'm going to tell you that unlockable has two different meanings. Able to be unlocked, right, where you can say the door is unlockable, that is, I can open it with my keys. And the second meaning of unlockable is that it's not able to be locked. The door is unlockable, meaning the lock is broken and I cannot lock the door. Now, before I move on to the next slide and show you where this ambiguity is, I want you to take a minute and try to do this in your own, at home with your pen and paper to see if you can find two ways of deriving the meaning, right? And then you can move on to the next slide where I'll show you how you actually do this. So the way that we understand morphology and the way we understand the rules of unlockable will give us the two different meanings of this word. So here are the two derivations of unlockable. You obviously start in both derivations with the root form of the word. The root of the word is lock because un is a prefix and able is a suffix, and therefore you start with lock, which is the root of the word, and then there are two ways of doing this, right? You can either attach the prefix or you can attach the suffix. So in the first case, I have shown you that you first attach the prefix un, so you get unlock, and then you attach able to it, meaning able to be unlocked, right? And then with the second derivation, you can see you take the root form of the word lock and then you attach able to it to create lockable, and then you attach onto it to create unlockable. I can show you this by creating two different tree structures. So in this case, you can see you start with the verb lock and then you attach onto it, which is a prefix, and you still get a verb. And what Hubble is looking for is a verb, and therefore you can take Hubble, put it to unlock, and then you can get an adjective. With the second derivation, you can see you start with the verb again, but you put things onto the right-hand side because it's a suffix, so that's able. And then what you get is an adjective, and what is looking for to attach is an adjective, and therefore you get unlockable. And you can do this because there are two different uns, like we saw before, with respect to the homophonous morphemes, right? So what I want you to do is I want you to try to do the two different ambiguous structures for unlockable at home and try to understand the rules that we've looked at with morphology and try to draw these two different kinds of tree structures with respect to the two structures of unlockable.